Ethan Vance felt the ghost of a life he no longer lived in the sterile, cold air of the boutique. It smelled of expensive perfume and new leather, a scent so alien to his current existence that it felt like a different planet. His world now smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and the honest sweat of physical labor. He ran a calloused thumb over the rough seam of his jeans, his steel-toed work boots feeling like lead weights on the polished marble floor. Each step was a dull thud, an intrusion in a space designed for silent, graceful movements. He knew he did not belong here. That was precisely the point. He had been walking for hours, letting the biting November wind scour the weariness from his bones. The city was a blur of hurried faces and flashing lights, a symphony of noise he had learned to tune out. But the window display of Aurelia had caught his eye. A single mannequin, draped in a simple, elegant blue dress that cost more than his monthly rent. It was the color of his late wife's eyes. The memory hit him not like a soft wave of nostalgia, but like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He had pushed open the heavy glass door without thinking, drawn by the pull of a phantom limb. Inside, everything was white and gold, a minimalist temple to wealth. Racks of clothing stood like skeletal sculptures, each garment given ample space to be worshipped. He drifted between them, not truly seeing the silk blouses or cashmere sweaters. He was seeing Sarah, her laughter echoing in the silent, cavernous space. He remembered a time when buying a dress like this would have been a casual Tuesday afternoon activity. A time when he commanded boardrooms, when his name on a contract could shift markets. A time before the accident, before the world he had built with meticulous care had crumbled into dust and ash. A sharp cough, precise and judgmental, shattered his reverie. He turned to see a woman whose posture was as severe as her black pantsuit. Her name tag read, Ms. Albright, Manager. Her eyes flickered from his scuffed boots to his worn flannel jacket, and her lips tightened into a thin, dismissive line. She was cataloging his perceived failures, tallying up the reasons he was unworthy of breathing this rarefied air. "Can I help you?" she asked, and the words were not an offer, but an accusation. Ethan shook his head, the motion slow. "Just looking." His voice was rough from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone beyond a simple yes or no at the lumberyard or the diner where he ate most of his meals. "This is a high-end boutique," Ms. Albright stated, as if he might have mistaken it for a hardware store. "Perhaps you're in the wrong place." He felt a familiar, bitter taste rise in his throat. It was the taste of shame, of being cast out. He had cast himself out of his old life, but it was different when someone else did it. Someone who saw only the dirt under his fingernails and not the man underneath. He thought about turning and walking away, retreating back to the anonymity of the streets and the quiet solitude of his small rented workshop. That was the easy path, the one he had been taking for 2 years. But something held him there. Maybe it was the lingering image of the blue dress. Maybe it was a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who never backed down from a challenge. He met her gaze, his own eyes, clear and steady, holding a depth of loss she could never comprehend. "I think I'm in the right place," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Ms. Albright's face hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're making our clientele uncomfortable." Ethan glanced around. The only other person in the store was a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous expression, busy refolding a stack of sweaters. She looked mortified, her cheeks flushed with vicarious embarrassment. She was not uncomfortable. She was ashamed of her boss. Ms. Albright was the one who was uncomfortable. His presence disrupted the carefully curated illusion of her perfect, wealthy world. "I'm not causing any trouble," Ethan said, his voice remaining level. He had faced down hostile corporate raiders and furious union leaders. This woman was nothing. And yet, in his current state, she held all the power. Our policy is to maintain a certain atmosphere. Your appearance is not conducive to that atmosphere." She took a half-step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Please don't make me call security." He saw the young employee flinch. She looked at him, her eyes pleading with him to just go, to avoid a bigger scene. It was in that moment, seeing the genuine empathy in a stranger's face, that something shifted in him. For 2 years, he had been a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life. He had accepted his exile. He had wallowed in it. He gave a slow nod, not to Miss Albright, but to the young woman. He turned and walked toward the door, the manager's triumphant smirk burning into his back. As he reached for the handle, the kind-eyed employee hurried over, a glass of water in her hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She shouldn't have done that." He paused, looking at her. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a weariness about her that suggested a life harder than it should be. Her name tag read, Aurelia. "It's all right," he said. "It wasn't your fault." "Still," she insisted, pushing the glass toward him. "Please, you looked thirsty." He took the glass, his rough, calloused fingers brushing against hers. He saw her glance at his hands, not with disgust, but with a flicker of curiosity. He drank the water. It was cool and clean, and felt like the first act of grace he had received in a very long time. He handed the empty glass back to her. "Thank you, Aurelia." Saying her name felt significant. It made the connection real. He walked out of the store, the bell above the door chiming a final, mocking farewell. The cold air hit him again, but this time, it didn't feel cleansing. It felt empty. He stood on the sidewalk, the city's indifferent crowds flowing around him. The humiliation was a dull ache, but underneath it, something else was stirring. A spark. The small, simple act of kindness from Aurelia had been like a flint-striking stone in the darkness of his self-imposed prison. He thought about Miss Albright's words. Your appearance. A certain atmosphere. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had built his company, signed billion-dollar deals, and held his dying wife. Now they fixed broken cabinets and leaky faucets. He had chosen this life as a way to punish himself, to strip away everything he had been. He had believed he deserved to be an outcast. But Aurelia hadn't seen an outcast. She had seen a person. He started walking again, but this time with a purpose. His workshop was miles away, but his old office, the one he hadn't set foot in for 2 years, was only 10 blocks from here. He knew the name Aurelia was just a brand, a subsidiary. He also knew who owned the parent company, or rather, who owned it now. Sterling Hale, the very firm that had picked over the bones of his empire after he had been forced to sell, piece by painful piece, to cover the debts and lawsuits that followed the accident. A cold, hard anger began to crystallize in his chest. It was an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, and it felt powerful. It felt like coming home. He had let them take everything. He had walked away because he believed he had no right to fight, no right to lead, after his failure had cost Sarah her life. He had accepted their narrative, that he was a reckless, broken man. He reached the gleaming glass tower of his old headquarters. Vance Industries. The name was still carved in the granite archway, but it was a hollow monument. He walked past the security guards who no longer knew his face and took the public elevator to the 34th floor. The law offices of Peterson, Shaw, and Gould. Arthur Peterson had been his lawyer, his mentor, and his friend for 20 years. Arthur, a man in his late 60s with a mind still as sharp as a razor, looked up from his desk as Ethan entered his office. His eyes widened in shock. "Ethan? My God, is that you?" Ethan closed the door behind him. "It's me, Arthur." The old lawyer stood, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Where have you been? I've tried to reach you. Your old numbers are disconnected. I thought, well, I feared the worst. I've been around, Ethan said evasively, working with my hands, trying to forget. Arthur gestured to a leather chair. Forgetting isn't your style, son. What's happened? What brought you back? Ethan sat down, the plush leather a stark contrast to the hard wooden stools he was used to. I was asked to leave a store today, Arthur, because I looked like I couldn't afford to be there. Arthur frowned, confused. What store? A boutique called Aurelia. It's owned by Sterling Hale. They bought it as part of the Vance Retail Group acquisition. Understanding dawned on Arthur's face, followed by a slow, grim smile. Ah, so the lion has decided to wake up. I want to know everything about Sterling Hale's position, Ethan said, his voice low and intense. Their financials, their vulnerabilities, their major shareholders. And I want to know the exact corporate structure of the Vance Retail Group. I want to know who owns Aurelia. They broke up the group, Ethan, Arthur warned. Sold off most of the brands. Aurelia is one of the few they kept. It's a small piece of their portfolio. Small pieces can be broken off, Ethan countered. He leaned forward, the fire in his eyes a sight Arthur hadn't seen in years. I have the capital. The accounts you manage for me? They've been dormant. It's time to put that money to work. Arthur studied him for a long moment. He saw the pain that still clung to Ethan like a shroud, but he also saw the iron resolve that had made him a legend in the business world. This isn't about a rude store manager, is it? Ethan thought of Amelia's kind eyes, of the simple glass of water that had felt like a lifeline. No, he admitted. It's not. It's about remembering who I am. He paused, the truth of his next words surprising even himself. And it's about a promise I made to myself a long time ago. To build things that last. To take care of the people who work for me. Sterling Hale. They don't build. They strip and sell. They're vultures, Arthur agreed, his voice hard. And they're over-leveraged. A targeted, aggressive acquisition of a subsidiary could make them very nervous. It could force their hand. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's get to work. For the next 48 hours, they worked relentlessly. Ethan's mind, which had been clouded by grief and numb with manual labor, came alive. The intricate webs of finance and corporate law were a language he spoke fluently. It was like riding a bicycle. He devoured spreadsheets, market analyses, and shareholder reports. He directed a team of analysts Arthur assembled, his commands sharp and precise. The ghost of Ethan Vance, the handyman, receded, and Ethan Vance, the CEO, reemerged, clad in borrowed suits that felt strange on his skin but familiar to his soul. He learned that Sterling Hale was indeed vulnerable. They had paid too much for his assets and were struggling with debt. The Aurelia brand, while small, was one of their few profitable ventures. Taking it from them would be more than a financial blow. It would be a symbolic one. It would be a declaration of war. Ethan structured the deal himself. He created a new holding company, a shell with an innocuous name, and began buying up shares of Sterling Hale's publicly traded debt. He used his vast personal fortune to execute a series of complex financial maneuvers that put immense pressure on their stock price. Then, through his new company, he made a formal offer to acquire the Aurelia brand and all its assets. The offer was deliberately priced just high enough to be irresistible to a board of directors concerned about their fiduciary duty, but low enough to be an insult. Sterling Hale's CEO, a ruthless man named Marcus Thorne, who had personally overseen the dismantling of Vance Industries, was caught completely off guard. He fought back, but Ethan had anticipated his every move. He had laid a perfect trap. After a whirlwind 72 hours of hostile negotiations and backroom dealings, Thorne and his board had no choice but to accept the offer. It was a surgical strike, executed with breathtaking speed and precision. The day the deal closed, Ethan didn't feel the triumph he expected. He felt a quiet, grim satisfaction. He stood in Arthur's office, the final acquisition papers in his hand. He hadn't bought the company for revenge. He had bought it to reclaim a piece of himself, and he had bought it because of a young woman named Aurelia. He found himself wondering what she was doing, if she was refolding sweaters. Her brow furrowed with worry. He had seen the anxiety in her eyes, the fear of a person living paycheck to paycheck, at the mercy of managers like Albright. He left the law office and went not to his workshop, but back to his old penthouse apartment, which had sat empty and silent for 2 years, a museum of his former life. He showered, the hot water washing away the grime of his recent past, and the sterile chill of his brief return to the corporate world. He didn't put on a suit. He put on a pair of clean jeans, a simple gray sweater, and the same work boots. They were a part of him now. They were real. He walked back to the boutique. It was late afternoon, the city lights beginning to glitter against the bruised twilight sky. He pushed open the heavy glass door. The bell chimed. Ms. Albright was at the counter, her back to him. She turned, and a flash of annoyance crossed her face before she could mask it. "You again? I thought I made myself clear." Aurelia was there too, standing near a rack of coats. Her eyes widened when she saw him. She looked from him to her manager, her expression filled with dread. Ethan ignored the manager. He walked directly to Aurelia. "Hello, Aurelia." "Hi," she said, her voice a whisper. She looked terrified for him. "Aurelia, stay away from him," Ms. Albright snapped, marching toward them. "Sir, I am calling security right now. You are trespassing." Ethan turned to face Ms. Albright. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He held out the folder he was carrying. "That won't be necessary." She eyed the folder with suspicion. "What is this?" "These are acquisition papers," Ethan said calmly. "As of 11 o'clock this morning, my holding company completed the purchase of the Aurelia brand, its inventory, and all its operational assets. That includes this store." Ms. Albright stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. A slow, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. "You're insane. You think I'm going to believe that some construction worker bought this company?" "I don't care what you believe," Ethan said, his voice flat. He placed the folder on a glass display case. "My name is Ethan Vance. You can look me up. Your corporate ownership records will be updated by morning. Your direct deposit will now be signed by me. Or rather, by the company I own." He let that sink in. "Which means, Ms. Albright, that you now report to me." The color drained from her face. She looked from the papers to Ethan's calm, unreadable expression. She saw no hint of a lie, no trace of madness. She saw only absolute authority. Her own arrogance and prejudice were crashing down around her. Aurelia was frozen, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. The quiet, sad man in the flannel jacket was suddenly someone else entirely, someone powerful and unknowable. Ethan's gaze softened as it met hers. "Aurelia, could you come with me for a moment? We need to talk." He turned to the stunned manager. "Ms. Albright, you can close up early tonight. We'll discuss your future with the company tomorrow." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. He led a speechless Aurelia out of the store and into the cold evening air. They walked in silence for a block before he stopped beside a small park, its benches empty under the glow of old-fashioned lamps. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "Who are you?" "My name is Ethan Vance," he repeated softly. I built a large company, Vance Industries. I lost it a couple of years ago. I lost everything." He didn't say Sarah's name. He couldn't. Not yet. "I've been trying to figure out how to live since then." She looked at his boots, then at his face. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made no sense. So you just bought the company because the manager was rude to you? He shook his head. No, I did it because you were kind to me. He met her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt truly seen. You gave me a glass of water, Amelia. You looked at me like I was a human being. No one had done that in a very long time. I realized that the company I built, the one that was supposed to value people, had been turned into something that employs people like Albright. Something that makes people like you afraid. I couldn't let that stand. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering against the cold, though he suspected it wasn't just the temperature. So what happens now? Now, he said, a hint of a long-lost smile touching his lips. I learn how to run a company again. A better one this time. He hesitated, feeling a vulnerability he hadn't felt since he first asked Sarah on a date. I could use some help. From someone who knows what it's like on the ground. Someone who knows what's wrong. I'd like you to work with me. Not as a clerk, but as an advisor. To help me fix this. Amelia stared at him, a storm of emotions in her eyes. Shock, fear, and a tiny flickering flame of hope. I have a daughter, she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if it were a confession. Lily. She's 5. I have to be there to pick her up from daycare. I can't work late hours in some corporate office. The mention of a child sent a pang through Ethan's chest, a familiar ache for the family he and Sarah had planned to have. Your daughter comes first, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. Always. We'll make it work. Whatever schedule you need. Whatever you need. She searched his face, looking for the catch, the fine print. She found only a deep, profound earnestness. A single tear traced a path down her cold cheek. She nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Mr. Vance. Ethan, he corrected gently. Just Ethan. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan dismantled the cold, profit-at-all-costs culture that Sterling Hale had implemented. Ms. Albright was fired, not out of spite, but because her employee file was filled with complaints from other staff members that had been systematically ignored. Ethan met with every employee, from the stockroom to the sales floor, listening to their concerns. Amelia was his guide. She was quiet and observant, but her insights were invaluable. She pointed out draconian sick day policies, unfair scheduling practices, and a commission structure that pitted employees against each other. She spoke of the constant pressure to upsell, to treat customers not as people but as walking wallets. With her input, Ethan began to institute changes. He raised the base pay, introduced flexible hours for parents, and created a new bonus system based on team performance and customer satisfaction. He and Amelia worked out of a small rented office space, not a towering skyscraper. He wanted to stay close to the ground. Their relationship was professional, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper. He found himself looking forward to their morning coffee meetings, to the way she would bite her lip when she was concentrating on a problem, to the quiet strength in her eyes. He learned more about her life. She was a single mother, having been abandoned by her partner shortly after Lily was born. She was fiercely independent and devoted to her daughter. She spoke of Lily with a light in her eyes that reminded Ethan of how he used to feel when he spoke about his dreams with Sarah. One afternoon, Amelia's daycare called. Lily was running a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. Amelia's face went pale with panic. I'm sorry, Ethan. I have to go. I can finish these reports from home tonight. Don't worry about the reports, he said instantly. Go. Is there anything I can do? No, I'll be fine, she said, already grabbing her coat. The bus is going to take forever. I'll drive you, he said, not as a question. He hadn't driven himself since the accident, always taking cabs or the subway. But the look on her face made the decision for him. He rented a car service, and they rode in silence to a small, brightly colored building in a quiet neighborhood. When they walked in, A little girl with big, curious brown eyes and pigtails ran toward them, her face flushed. "Mommy!" Amelia scooped her up, hugging her tightly. "Hey, sweet pea, you don't feel so good, huh?" She turned to Ethan, a hesitant look on her face. "Lily, this is my boss, Ethan." Lily peered at him from the safety of her mother's arms. "Your boots are loud," she declared, her voice small and feverish. Ethan smiled, a real, unforced smile. "They are. They're for working." "Mommy works," Lily said. "She sells dresses." "She does more than that now," Ethan said, his eyes meeting Amelia's over her daughter's head. "She helps people." He drove them home to a small but tidy apartment in a walk-up building. He helped Amelia carry her sleeping daughter up the 3 flights of stairs. When he placed Lily gently on her bed, her small hand curled around his finger for a moment, a simple, trusting gesture that sent an earthquake through his carefully constructed walls. Amelia made tea, and they sat in her small living room, the sounds of the city muted by the glass. Framed crayon drawings decorated the walls. One, in particular, caught his eye. It was a drawing of 2 stick figures, a woman and a little girl, holding hands under a giant smiling sun. "Thank you, Ethan," Amelia said, her voice soft. "For everything. The job, the ride. You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did," he said, looking at the drawing. "Amelia. The accident. It wasn't just my company I lost. My wife, Sarah, was in the car with me. It was my fault. I was driving too fast, trying to close a deal on the phone. I chose work over her, and she died." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful. He hadn't spoken those words aloud to anyone, not even Arthur. He watched her face, expecting to see judgment or pity. Instead, he saw a deep, aching compassion that mirrored his own pain. She reached across the small table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm. "That's a heavy thing to carry." "Some days it's too heavy," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "That's why I was hiding. In my workshop. In those boots. I thought if I punished myself enough, it would make sense. But it never did." "It wasn't a punishment," she said softly. "It was a cocoon. You were waiting." He looked at her, at the incredible strength and kindness that radiated from her, and realized she was right. He had been waiting for a reason to live again, and he had found it in a boutique, in a glass of water, in the trusting eyes of a mother and her child. Their relationship deepened after that. The professional lines blurred into a genuine friendship, and then, slowly, tentatively, into something more. He started having dinner with her and Lily, his loud boots becoming a familiar sound in their hallway. He would help Lily with her block towers and read her bedtime stories. He found himself laughing again, a sound he thought had died with Sarah. He was building something new, not with steel and glass, but with trust and quiet moments. But the past was not finished with him. Marcus Thorne and Sterling Hale had not forgotten their humiliation. They saw the new people-focused Aurelia as a threat to their business model. They started a smear campaign in the financial press, painting Ethan as an unstable, grief-stricken man on a vanity project, destined for failure. They pressured suppliers to drop Aurelia's accounts and poached key employees with exorbitant offers. Ethan fought back, using his wealth and strategic mind to counter their moves. But it was a draining, ugly battle. One evening, he came to Amelia's apartment looking exhausted, the weight of the world back on his shoulders. "He's trying to ruin us, Amelia," Ethan said, pacing her small living room. "Thorne is calling in every favor he has. He's trying to bankrupt the company just to prove a point." "Then let him," she said, her voice calm and steady. He stopped, staring at her. "What? Let him? This is everything we've built." "No," she said, walking over to him and placing her hands on his chest, stilling his restless energy. What we've built is right here. You gave people their dignity back. You gave me a chance. You gave my daughter a reason to smile when you walk through the door. That's what we built. A company is just a thing, Ethan. It can be rebuilt. Don't let him turn you back into the man you were, the man who valued deals over people. Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. She was right. He was falling back into the old patterns, seeing the fight as a war to be won at any cost. He was letting Thorn define the terms of his life again. He looked into her eyes and saw his salvation. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice raw with vulnerability. "You fight for the people, not the stock price," she said. "You show them you're not him, and you come home for dinner. Lily made you a new drawing." His resolve hardened, but this time it was a different kind of strength. It wasn't the cold iron of a corporate raider, but the tempered steel of a man with something real to protect. He called a company-wide meeting the next day. He stood before all the employees of Aurelia, with Amelia by his side. He laid out the situation honestly. He told them about Sterling Hale's attacks, about the financial pressure they were under. He told them he might lose the company. "I can't promise you that Aurelia will exist in 6 months," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But I can promise you this. As long as I am in charge, you will be treated with respect. You will be paid fairly, and I will fight for every single one of you. But I won't do it by becoming the monster we're fighting against. We will win by being better, not by being more ruthless." He announced he was taking his entire salary and putting it into an employee relief fund. He was selling his penthouse and moving into a smaller place, funneling the money into the company's cash reserves. It was a declaration of his new values. He was all in, not for the name on the building, but for the people inside it. The response was overwhelming. The employees, who had been courted by Sterling Hale's offers, turned them down. They rallied around Ethan. Their loyalty wasn't to a brand. It was to a man who had shown them he cared. The story leaked to the press, not the financial papers, but the human interest columns. The narrative began to shift. Ethan Vance wasn't an unstable relic. He was a revolutionary, a leader trying to build a more humane form of capitalism. Public support for Aurelia surged. Sales skyrocketed. Thorn, furious and desperate, made his final move. He found a loophole in the original sales contract, a technicality that could allow him to sue Ethan personally, to tie him up in litigation for years and potentially seize his personal assets, including his control of Aurelia. It was a brutal personal attack. Arthur Peterson called with the news. "It's bad, Ethan. He can drag you through the mud, drain your finances. He could win." That night, Ethan sat in his workshop, the place he had gone to hide from the world. He was surrounded by the smell of wood and the tools of a simple trade. He felt the old despair creeping back in. He had tried to do the right thing, and it was going to cost him everything all over again. He would lose the company. He would lose the life he was building with Amelia and Lily. He had failed. Again. The door creaked open. Amelia stood there, a small paper bag in her hand. Lily was beside her, holding a flashlight. "We brought you dinner," Amelia said softly. "You didn't come home." Lily shone the flashlight on his face. "Are you sad, Ethan?" He couldn't speak. He just nodded, the lump in his throat too large to overcome. Amelia came and sat on a wooden stool beside him. She took his large, calloused hand in hers. "Arthur called me. He told me what Thorn is doing." "He's going to win," Ethan whispered. "I can't beat him this time, not without becoming him." "Then don't," she said simply. "Don't play his game. Do something else." "There is nothing else," he said, his voice filled with defeat. Lily walked up to him and tugged on his jeans. He looked down at her. She held up a piece of paper. It was another drawing. A man with loud boots, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands. Over their heads, she had drawn a lopsided crayon heart. "It's us," she said. We're a family. Ethan stared at the drawing, the innocent, powerful truth of it breaking through his despair. A family. He looked from the drawing to Aurelia, whose eyes were shining with tears, but also with an unwavering belief in him. In that moment, he understood. Thorn could take the company. He could take the money. But he could not take this. What was real, what mattered, was right here in this dusty workshop. A new kind of clarity settled over him. A peace. He knew what he had to do. You're right, he said, his voice clear and strong. He stood up, pulling Aurelia to her feet. He can't win, because he doesn't know what he's fighting for. The next morning, Ethan didn't call his lawyers. He called Marcus Thorn directly. He asked for a face-to-face meeting. Thorn, smelling blood in the water, agreed immediately, naming a time at his own office, a power play Ethan was happy to concede. When Ethan walked into the sterile, opulent headquarters of Sterling Hale, he wasn't wearing a suit. He wore his work boots and clean jeans. He felt no shame, only strength. He was no longer a man hiding in a costume. He was simply himself. Thorn sat behind a massive desk, a smug, predatory smile on his face. Vance? Come to beg? No, Marcus, Ethan said, his voice calm. I came to surrender. Thorn's smile faltered. What? You can have the company, Ethan said. I'll sign it over, all of it. In exchange, you drop the lawsuit and you guarantee, in an ironclad contract that my lawyers will draft, that not a single employee of Aurelia will be fired for the next 5 years. You will honor their current salaries and benefits packages for that same period. You will not touch their new policies. Thorn stared at him, utterly baffled. This was not a move he had anticipated. It made no sense in his world of profit and loss. You'd give up the entire company? For them? A company is just a name on a building, Marcus, Ethan said, the words echoing Aurelia's wisdom. The people are what make it real. You can have the building. I'll keep what's real. He could see the gears turning in Thorn's head. The man was a shark. He couldn't comprehend an animal that would willingly give up its territory. Why? Thorn asked, genuinely confused. What do you get out of this? Ethan thought of Lily's drawing. He thought of Aurelia's hand in his. He smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. You wouldn't understand. The deal was made. It was an unprecedented move in the corporate world, one that would be debated in business schools for years. Ethan Vance, the legendary Titan, had walked away from a fight, willingly giving up a multi-million-dollar company to protect its workers. To men like Thorn, it was an act of insanity. To Ethan, it was the only sane thing to do. He met Aurelia in the small park where they had first talked. He told her what he had done. She listened, her expression unreadable. So it's over, she said when he had finished. You lost. No, he said, taking her hands in his. I won. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I have no company. I have no penthouse. I have a workshop, a small savings account, and these 2 hands. But I know what matters now. I know who I am, and I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Lily, if you'll have me. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, one he had designed himself and commissioned from a local artisan. It wasn't a massive diamond like the one he had given Sarah. It was a simple band of white gold, with a single perfect blue sapphire, the color of his first wife's eyes, and the color of the dress that had led him back to life. It was a ring that honored his past and embraced his future. Aurelia looked from the ring to his face, her eyes overflowing with tears. You idiot, she whispered, a sob catching in her throat. Of course I'll have you. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her, the sounds of the city fading away until there was only the steady, hopeful beat of their hearts. 2 years later, Ethan stood on the porch of a modest house in the suburbs, a house with a yard and a tire swing. He wore his work boots, now scuffed from chasing a 7-year-old girl through the grass. The smell of sawdust was gone, replaced by the scent of freshly cut lawns and the charcoal of a nearby barbecue. He was no longer building cabinets. He was building a home. Amelia came out, carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade. She had quit her advisory role at the new soulless Aurelia and had gone back to school, finishing the social work degree she had abandoned years ago. She now worked for a nonprofit that helped single mothers. Ethan's remaining fortune, carefully invested, was more than enough for them to live comfortably, and he had set up a foundation, run by Arthur Peterson, that provided grants to organizations just like the one she worked for. Lily ran across the lawn, her pigtails flying. She held up a crumpled piece of paper. Another drawing. This one was of their house. 3 stick figures stood in front of it. A man, a woman, and a child. All of them were smiling. "Look what I made, Daddy," she said, beaming. The word still hit him with a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy every time she said it. He crouched down and took the drawing. "It's beautiful, Sweet Pea. The best one yet." He looked up at Amelia, who was watching them, her face alight with a love so profound it still took his breath away. He had lost an empire and found a world. He had been cast out of a temple of wealth only to find sanctuary in a small house with a tire swing. The man in the work boots had been asked to leave a store, a lost and broken ghost. But he had returned, not with acquisition papers to claim a company, but with an open heart to claim a life. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was finally, truly, in the right place.